Getting things done when you live with chronic pain can be really challenging, not just because of the pain, but also because of the where and the how the pain is processed. So if you find you are living with overwhelm, if you find that you are living with a depleted amount of energy and a depleted amount of motivation to get things done, coupled with the small window of time that you're afforded when you do live with pain to get things done, just know that you're not alone. When you're feeling like you're not getting things done, it can be really frustrating. It's not because you're lazy. It's not because you are unproductive. It's because of the pain, but more importantly, it's because of how and where that pain is processed. And as you'll discover in today's episode, pain is processed very much partially in your executive functioning part of your brain. And so I'm going to invite you in to listen to today's episode where we dive into tips and tools to help you get a little more productive when the time and the pain allows it to happen. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chronic Pain Experience podcast. I am your host, Dina Chopoulos. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about executive dysfunction that often comes along with chronic pain. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to nurture it, but also how to work with it. There is a lot we could talk about, but we're going to try and simplify it a little bit because when it comes to the brain, it can be kind of complicated. And so today I am joined by Carrie Boyd. Carrie is a veteran teacher and lifelong list maker. She's an executive function coach based in Bend, Oregon, where she lives with her husband and 2 children. Carrie works with clients all over the United States. Her no-shame approach and the strategies and tools that she teaches empower students to thrive in life and in school, help parents and teachers to better support their children, and help adults get on top of all that life requires. In addition to coaching, she's also an adjunct instructor for early career teachers at University of Portland in Oregon. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Dina. Thanks for having me.
This is amazing because there's a lot we could talk about with executive functioning, and who better to talk to a teacher than in dealing with, and coach, of course, with executive functioning. So let's talk first about, for our listeners, what is executive functioning? And then also maybe if we could tie in what cognitive processes does it actually impact?
Yeah, well, they're sort of one and the same. This is a great place to start because when I talk to people and meet people, most people don't even know what this term is, executive function. I kind of wish there was a different term. I don't love it, but this is what we have. This is what the brain people tell us to call it. So my short definition for executive function is just the brain skills that help us get things done. And then that's sort of like the simple version. And then in terms of like, what does that look like for reals? It's things like organization. It's things like planning, like thinking ahead, future thinking, I like to call it. Right. It's things like getting started. The executive function, we call it task initiation, but especially on complicated tasks or non-preferred tasks, or just when we're tired, how easy is it for us to get started on things? So this is the sort of thing we're talking about. I work with a lot of students, but I work with a whole lot of adults too. And I would say sort of the biggies for adults and kids are the task initiation, like getting started, getting over the hump to get started on whatever the task is. But also there's this thing called goal-directed persistence, which is finishing the task. So like not only getting started, but like finishing to its completion. But I hear a lot about like organization stuff. Like I just have piles everywhere, or I have a hard time tracking my bills, or calendar stuff. So all of those things are wrapped up in what executive function is, all the things that it takes to get stuff done.
Okay. Boy, there's so much we could talk about right there.
Where do you want to start?
That's a perfect description of it. So for any of our listeners who do live with pain, I'm guessing there's a lot of head nodding going, yep, that's me, that's me. Now, there's lots of reasons for it, and we are going to get into it and why. But I'm also thinking, too, that this probably has a lot to do with, because it's the brain in general. You know, if we have any listeners who do have ADHD or suspect that they might have ADHD, there's a lot of overlap here. So let's dive into it. Before we get into it, I just want to bring in the pain piece, if I could.
Yeah.
So how chronic pain actually impacts our executive functioning, there's a science to it. And so I want to give you a little bit of background. We know from 12 and a half years of research, if not more, that pain is actually processed in many places within the brain and body. And our executive functioning areas in the brain is just one of them. And so when you are having a flare up, when you are in a lot of pain, that executive functioning tends to tank, essentially, and not do as well. Chronic pain also, we know, causes structural, functional, and chemical changes to the brain and central nervous system. And so when the brain changes, responsibilities it has, energy it utilizes to do these tasks is compromised. And then when the pain is the only thing you can focus on, that focus on the pain disrupts the ability to pay attention to anything else. It's hard to motivate yourself to get those tasks started or to complete them. And so when you can focus on nothing else other than the pain, it becomes increasingly difficult to organize our life, our thoughts, our things. It also impacts the goal setting part of process, and that's all because of where pain is processed. And then, of course, on a secondary layer, if you're not sleeping because of pain, then that's going to also. So there's lots we can talk about there.
Can I ask you something? Can I ask you a question? So the executive functions live in the prefrontal cortex, like this portion right here behind your forehead. I'm pointing, although some of your listeners are listening, but right behind your forehead. And I'm curious, like what you said, pain is processed in lots of different areas of the brain. I'm just curious, like any of them up here or no?
Yeah. Right there, right where you're pointing. So for our listeners, Carrie's got it bang on. One of the centers, and there's many. So the amygdala, also in the prefrontal cortex, lots of different, and actually a new article just came out that they feel like they found the specific pathway, although there's many. So there's still some work to do. But yes, it absolutely directly impacts the executive functioning area of your prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, well, that makes perfect sense then, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why we're here, because I think this is a great conversation to be having. And when I saw your post in Facebook and that this is what you do, I got a little excited. So,
well, I get real excited about this stuff too. So we're in the right place.
So let's dive in. Oh, beautiful. Okay. So what are some common challenges that individuals face when there is executive dysfunction? What kind of things are we looking at?
I mean, people come to me. So I was a teacher for a long, long time, but doing just coaching exclusively now. It's interesting, like sort of the reasons why people arrive to call me or to send me an email or whatever to want to work together. And it's often like a bit of a, like, I don't know, breaking point or like, oh, I cannot do this 1 second longer. I need to seek some help, which is great because that's what I do.
Yes.
But people often come to me, and adults. I'm thinking of one client that I work with, a woman. She's in her 30s, maybe 40, early 40s. And she and her husband own a business, and she is just struggling to just stay on top of life. Busy mom, busy, she's an employee or of the company, and just trying to just manage. Right. So it's all the stuff that it takes to manage. And so it's things like they're desperate for just help with figuring out time management is another executive function, right? Like, how do I use my time best? And how do I not lose track of appointments? Or I suspect maybe that's something that your listeners like, just staying on top of appointments with caregivers or people in the health field. But so it's sort of those types of things. So we already talked about like a hard time getting started on something boring. But time management is a biggie, like being able to understand the passing of time. Some brains that I work with, by the way, I like to blame brains for this stuff and not humans.
Yes.
Human, it is not your fault. Brain, we'll blame you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sure, but we can work on you.
Yeah, we're going to blame the brain. So brains that struggle with this stuff, like just starting can be challenging, but also the awareness of time. Like I mentioned, some brains just don't have the same awareness of time as others. Well, fine.
Yeah.
But there are strategies and tools to use to make it easier, to make that less impactful on a regular basis. So they come to me with all these sorts of, there's also things like controlling impulses, and emotional control is also executive function. So being able to say not now to lots of different impulsive behaviors. I mean, we talk in my world, we talk about interrupting people, but also like impulsive spending or
Yeah.
eating, or there's all these things that are wrapped up. They're sort of like all
Overlapped.
connected,
Oh, for sure.
connected to one another, unfortunately.
Yeah.
but
Well, I
but it
think
is what it is.
you nailed it on the head when it comes to the chronic pain experience, because
Yeah, let's hear it.
speaking my language now, like as far as, the overwhelm coming in and as far as not being able to get started or not being able to finish, the emotional regulation. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is again, chronic pain is also processed. And that's why emotions are very much a part of pain amplification or
Mm.
pain dialing down,
Oh,
is our
interesting.
emotion centers are also a part of the pain process. And so chronic
Mm.
pain in particular.
Sure.
So, yeah, so we are on the same page here, working
Okay.
towards helping our listeners get a little more
Good.
executive function going. Now, before we get into
Right.
sort of how we can do that, I think it's really important just to kind of lurk a little bit in the whole self-compassion piece, because
Yes.
and I'm sure you find this with your clients as well. We can be really hard on ourselves as humans, but as soon as you add in chronic pain or chronic illness, then it's just that much harder on ourselves. So, how
Yeah.
important is it, in your opinion, for our listeners to approach this with a sense of self-compassion?
I talk about it all the time. I mean, it's related to that like blaming the brain thing,
Right.
right? Like do not blame yourself. There is nothing you could have done differently.
Mhm.
Let's blame the brain and acknowledge that this is happening. And then absolutely like give yourself a little bit of time, but actually a lot of time. One of the things I talk with clients about, or anybody who will listen, is that um, the good thing is brains can change,
Yes.
but the bad news is that it's real slow.
And it's
And so
work.
this, yeah, and it's work,
Yeah.
exactly. And so there's no real quick fix. I like to say, like, I sure wish I had a magic wand that could
Right.
say, and you probably feel the same way with the
Oh,
chronic pain piece. Like, I wish I had a magic wand that could say, go
yeah.
away, but that doesn't exist.
No.
And so knowing that this is a process, that self-compassion piece is huge. And again, even the language that we use. So like in my world, we talk about the self-compassion, we talk about sticking up for your brain. I
Yeah.
talk with particularly students, like stick up
Yeah.
for your brain. This is what your brain needs.
Yeah.
Ask your teacher for this, or ask an
Sure.
adult for help. But the language that we use, I think, is especially important. Like, let's get away from lazy,
Yeah.
and maybe my brain struggles with, or I struggle with, task initiation.
Right.
Let's get away from forgetful, or whatever all these sort of shame words are. There's a whole lot of shame in this world
Oh
of
my
executive
gosh.
function challenges.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like let's think about the language that we use.
Right.
That it seems like that's all wrapped up in self-compassion, right?
Oh, for sure. And interestingly enough, how much pain you feel.
Yeah.
So words
Yeah,
actually have,
I didn't know that you were saying that about the how you're
yeah,
feeling, like emotionally can be related to the pain. Yeah,
totally.
so
Emotionally and
interesting.
physically, sociologically, it's just a little complicated, but it's a beautiful thing. It's
Yeah.
quite amazing how it all works. We talked a little bit about why it happens. We talked a little bit about understanding why you want to come at this from a caring space. Can you share some effective executive function hacks that can help individuals improve their daily functioning?
Yes. This is my favorite part.
Let's do it.
Other than making sure to be gentle with yourself. Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things come to mind. This is what I do is as I help clients sort of create like a collection of strategies or tools to fall back on when they're noticing that this is a challenge. And by the way, the noticing part is pretty big too.
Uh-huh.
Um, like just being aware. There's this word in the executive function world called metacognition. You probably know it because you're a brain person. But like thinking about your thinking. So like being aware when you are shaming yourself, or being aware when you're racing and you need to pause.
Yeah.
So you don't forget to grab the thing you need on the way out the door or whatever. Like, so the awareness piece is huge. So maybe that's thing number one is, and I like to refer to it like as just a pause,
Mm-hmm.
because we're
Mm-hmm.
so constantly just in this world, just responding to stimuli all the time and go, 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 go. And there's some value in our culture on getting lots of stuff done in a short amount of time.
Absolutely.
But take a beat,
Yeah.
not even a full minute, to
Yes.
just think for a moment.
Yeah.
Oh, right. what would be best here? Like, oh yeah, I'm not going to pick up my phone right now.
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh yeah, I'm going to pause before I walk out the door to see if I have everything I need. Or whatever it is, pause before you move on to the next task for work or whatever. Like just pause, right?
And in that moment, when they have that pause, is it just a truly a quiet space, or is there a pause for something to do?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's valuable enough to just have a quiet
Yeah,
moment.
I agree.
But in my mind, it's a pause, and I like to call it like the metacognition. I like to call like this little voice in your head that says like, "Don't pick up your phone," or "You should be working now."
Right.
Like, so it's almost. I like to think of it as like a pause and a listen,
Okay.
like to listen to sort of this little sort of
Yeah,
voice in your head. Um, so yeah, that's a good question. Like the pause is enough because
yeah,
our life can be crazy,
for
but
sure.
to pause and like listen or to think
Yeah,
about what should be next or what would be most helpful in this moment.
right.
Which brings me, this is a good one too. So that brings me to sort of another strategy. I don't know,
Yeah,
mantra.
yeah.
I don't know. I like to encourage people to be kind to future you.
Okay. What does that look
So,
like?
in other words, in that moment of pause, perhaps
Uh-huh.
that you think about future Dina,
Hmm.
like maybe it's something as simple as, like, I don't know, chopping up some chicken for tonight's dinner or something like that, right? Like something very practical like that.
Yeah.
But it also could be like, oh yeah, I've got this my little sticky note to-do list here, and
Mhm.
that's the one I don't really want to do right now. But future me is going to be happy that I accomplished that task.
Right.
Um, or another way, there's a gal out there on the internet called the Lazy Genius.
Oh,
And I don't know if you know her, she's wonderful. She calls it the magic question. So same idea, which is like, what can I do now
hmm.
to make my life easier later? So that's
Oh,
like, be kind to future me.
yeah, yeah.
Um, even things like, I guess I'll just make that phone call right now that's been dogging me. I don't want to do. Like,
Hmm.
I'll just do it. I'll just do it now. It's fast.
Yeah.
And it just be thinking about future you as much as possible.
Oh,
Um,
I love
and
that.
that's more a mantra than a strategy, but I like it.
Yeah. And it sounds like most of this is not possible unless you have a little bit of space for awareness. So,
Yeah.
you touched on it, and this is a crucial part because typically the word mindfulness is dropped out there, and so many people in our community are so tired of hearing that because they're being told by their doctor, you need to be more mindful, you need to practice mindfulness. Well,
Mhm.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
Right? How do I do that?
Yeah.
But you're describing it perfectly. It's really just a pause. It's a little bit
Yeah.
of an awareness piece, and it's also just the noticing what's around me, what are my
Yeah.
thoughts, noticing things differently.
Mhm.
It can be easily done, right?
Yeah, totally. I love the word notice. I use it all the time in my work. Like, what do you notice
Yeah.
about this situation or about
Yeah.
this task or this school assignment or like,
Yeah.
what are you noticing?
Right. The
It
word,
is. I mean, a lot of it is just awareness.
right.
Um, and it's like you can't unsee it then.
Yeah.
once you once you see it,
Yeah.
like it being all these tasks, or excuse me, all these executive functions,
Yeah.
and how they're interconnected and maybe how they're related to a life with chronic pain,
Right.
and you can't unsee it, which is great
Yeah.
because then you keep coming back to it like, okay, yeah, okay,
Right.
you
Well,
can't unsee it.
you touched on behaviors earlier, and I think that's an important
Yeah.
part too, because there's a thing called pain behaviors, which can also be kind of a triggering word, but you do anything, right? You learn to write, you learn to walk, ride a bike,
Mhm.
you do anything long enough and you get really good at it, right?
Yeah.
And I think does that fall into place, would you say, with executive functioning, right? When you've kind of been either on the good side or the not so good side, you've kind of built some habits around not
Mhm.
starting that task that is really mundane.
Yeah, totally. I'm glad you bring up the word habits because yeah, I mean it's behaviors, but
Hmm.
it's also like a habit, and some of them not so great, and some of them the thing about some of the tools and the strategies and things that I teach is they can become habits, which then you don't have to think about it so much. And to be honest, that's what brains need is like a little bit of autopilot, not 100%,
Right.
but like a little bit less brain energy going
Sure.
to, oh, this is a new task. I have to do this again and again. I was working with an adult client, another businesswoman who was onboarding clients and didn't really have like a template or a system and every time she got a new client, she was creating a list of questions to ask them. And we talked about what so much brain energy that could be saved by having something that she could just a form, right, to fill out, so that you don't have to continuously, like going to the grocery store, or even having a sort of list. This makes on like apps and stuff, when you order groceries online or pick them up or something like that, makes it a little bit easier because they save your lists. But even just having like a form, a template of what you often like to get at the grocery store can be so easy to then, you don't have to think about it every time, right?
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the energy conservation thing, because
Totally.
my gosh, whether you live with pain or not, if you're in overwhelm, especially with chronic pain, there is that sense of overwhelm. It is such a constant battle for resources. And so and that's another reason why it's sometimes really hard to just get up and get going. So, but you mentioned earlier that, you just start once, just start doing it. And then eventually, and then you do it again, and then you try it again. And then hopefully that a little bit more becomes a habit.
That makes me think of another sort of thing that mantra. I don't know if I like those words, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is in the executive function world, this is known as chunking. But in my world, it's known as just little by little, just baby steps. Give yourself like permission to just do a little. And then maybe you'll have more energy. What I learned is interesting. I don't know about how this relates to chronic pain or brains with people with chronic pain, but something about motivation that I learned recently, which is that we sort of think that we have to get motivated in order to get started. But actually what the brain science is telling us is it's the reverse. We have to just start. You mentioned this, like just start in order to get motivated. I thought that was super interesting, right?
That's good because it means we don't have to apply all that thought process.
No, just do something. Just baby steps. That's where the little by little comes in too. And chunking just means like break that task into really tiny chunks if you need to.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because motivation is such a difficult, or it's really challenging for our chronic pain listeners, because when you live in pain, there's nothing like feeling that pain to sap your energy for one, but also, sap your motivation. So good news is, if you just do that one little thing, you've started the ball rolling, essentially. So it doesn't have to be a big deal.
No, baby steps, little by little by little by little. And any task, sometimes when it's feeling overwhelming, like you talk about overwhelm a lot with your people, if it feels too big, whatever the thing is, then it's the first step is too big. Or if it feels overwhelming, then the first, like, make it even smaller. Like, I encourage people to give themselves permission to just work for, I don't know, 6 minutes. If 6 minutes feels too much, then 3. It doesn't matter. But just give yourself permission to be done after that if you need to. You might keep going, but you might not. And that's okay, right? Like giving yourself a little, like that compassion that we were talking about, self-compassion. Just giving yourself a little permission to go real slow. Real slow.
And I actually heard this recently from Dr. Kristen Neff. I don't know if you know her. She is sort of the lead researcher on self-compassion. She's amazing. And she describes it this way. Why you would want to take baby steps is because there's this thing called backdraft, just like they do for the firefighters. Firefighters won't go in and just open up the doors widely to a house that's on fire, because of all that oxygen. It's going to create this backdraft. And it's the same thing with self-compassion. Or I would say anything for that matter that you're just trying to get started on, is you have to take those little steps. Again, don't have to overthink it. You just have to approach it gently, with compassion and warmth and kindness, and take that little first step. And so you don't get the overwhelm. If you're trying to do it all, which...
Oh gosh, it feels like a mountain.
Okay, now goals. I know that it's challenging for our chronic pain community to even be in the mindset of setting goals. I'm trying to change that. We are very capable of setting goals, but I know that with executive functioning, goal setting can be impacted. Do you have any tips or tricks that might help those who are in a place of setting goals to help them be more successful?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my first thought is the little by little strategy that we just
Yeah.
talked about, and the blaming your brain strategy, right? But goals can be small or big, right? It
Right.
could be
Right.
like big time dreams way in the future, or it could just be for the day or the moment. I think one really important thing is to write it down.
Right.
Write your goal down. I like to call this sort of making the invisible visible,
Mhm.
because the sort of we have so many invisible things in the world.
Right.
Time is invisible. We talked about that, sort of expectations, but even goals, right? If we think it, that's fine, but it might just disappear. Dr. Gail Matthews, I just was recently reminded that she did a study on goal setting, and I think it's 42%. If we write down a goal,
Mhm.
physically write it down, we are 42% more likely to achieve it.
Right.
And there's lots to it, but the actual making it visible for ourselves, there's some sensory stuff with like physically writing it with your eyes, seeing it.
Yeah.
Then your brain will be kind of on the lookout for ways to achieve that goal. It's not only just for goal setting, by the way, the make the invisible visible, like keep stuff in your face. That is
Right.
just a really, speaking of hacks, like maybe that's my favorite or the best one is like just keep stuff in your face. I'm reminded of like when I go on a trip or if I'm leaving the house and I want to not forget to take a certain item with me, I will literally put it in my path so that
Yes.
when I am walking out the door that I won't forget it, right? That's
Right.
a obvious example of making the invisible visible.
Oh, I like
But
that.
like, little
Yeah.
checklists or writing down your goals
Right.
or a calendar, like making a
Yeah.
calendar for the day or for the week. So just keeping stuff in your face,
Yeah.
um, so that you don't forget it.
Yeah.
And I would imagine in the chronic pain world
Yeah.
that it's common to forget things because of the pain, right?
Oh, for
Uh,
sure. Oh my gosh. And even to the point of taking medications can be a real uphill battle,
for sure.
especially when
For
they're in
sure.
flare up or whatever.
Right. Right.
Okay. So actually, would you happen off the top of your head to have some sort of tip that they might be able to utilize to organize those schedules a little
Mm.
bit better? I know that's a
I
tough.
mean, some brains that I work with
Mhm.
prefer something on paper
Right.
than the digital world. Now there are excellent digital products,
Yeah.
apps, all
Yeah.
of it. I use a mixture of myself personally.
Mhm.
Um, but so I would say sometimes it means a paper calendar to
Right.
to look at and physically write on.
Right.
But there's I would say alarms, timers, notifications, like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Alexa, Google Home, any of it,
Right.
as much as possible, just to offload it from your brain so you don't have to be the one to remember it all the time, but to use timers, to use reminders on your phone, to use alarms or things like that,
Yeah.
is the first thing that comes to mind. And then some kind of like a pill organizer, probably, right?
Yeah.
My dad had Parkinson's and took I don't know how many pills a day, and it was very, he had help doing it. My
Right.
mom was helping as caregiver,
Right.
but
That's the big one. Yeah.
setting something like that up ahead of time or getting a friend or somebody to help you set it up ahead of time,
Right.
seems like a real logical
Yeah.
solution.
And I feel bad, because I know we could probably just bring in people from within the chronic pain community and they would give us a whole list of things that they currently do because there's,
Yeah,
they're the experts. But I wanted to ask you too because I think it's
sure.
more voices at the table, right?
For sure. Or
Okay.
they've tried. I mean, that's the one
Yeah.
thing to say too about all these strategies, tools, et cetera, is it may not work for every brain,
True.
right?
Very true
I
because
mean,
they're all so different.
right. So sure, this particular timer, I don't have it in front of me, but like this one timer that I like to recommend works for some people, but some are like, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But finding things and trying lots of things
Yeah.
and then zeroing in on what works best for your brain.
Right. Now, just as sort of a supplement to what we talked about, the goal setting and whatnot, is our reward system. We're
Yeah.
so motivated by our reward system.
Mhm.
And it does unfortunately become a bit of a challenge when it comes to chronic pain because we're so used to being hard on ourselves that
Mhm.
we need to now find ways to reward ourselves because that's how our brain loves to work. So
Mhm.
I don't know how to ask this, but are you seeing when people are starting to get into more of their executive functioning as opposed to dysfunctioning, that the reward system becomes a little bit stronger?
A couple things come to mind. One, I think it's okay to say to yourself, like, if I just work on this thing for 10 minutes, then I get to have a cup of my favorite tea, or play with the dog or the cat, or so I'm all on board with rewards. One of the things we do talk about in my work with folks is dopamine as a reward, right? So and we can kind of play that.
Yeah.
I like the teenagers I work with really think this is cool, but like to trick your brain kind of into earning a little bit of dopamine, which is the reward in and of itself. So we talked about writing down a goal, even just like a little checklist as a goal, but the checking off of the list or crossing off is a little hit of dopamine.
Yeah.
And now that we know that, then we can sort of give it a go. From what I understand from brain science is that there's like 3 steps. First, dopamine, I think, is created in a couple parts of our brains, but we set a goal, but we have to think we can do it. So it has to be like achievable. So back to the thing on chunking or like little by little, you can't say like, clean the entire garage or whatever, you can't, or the bedroom or whatever, but real small. So like set a goal, make it really small, achievable. And then there has to be like proof that you met your goal, and then you'll earn a little bit of dopamine. So the proof could be the crossing off, could be setting a timer and like hearing that the timer went, oh, look at me, I did 10 minutes. So there is the reward thing is real. It's real. Speaking of habits, like we talked about earlier, eventually maybe you won't need the little rewards here and there because the habit will be created. But
great article yesterday about doing things related to your health and tying it into your core values. And I'm a big believer in that, especially for our listeners who are really feeling stuck deep in the muck of pain.
Yes.
And this little tidbit, which I thought was just so beautiful, that the research is there, that when we tie in a task to our value set, then it becomes more doable. It's more meaningful, and it's easier to achieve. We just think differently when we tie it into our values. So for example, if there was an app that was, I think the research actually had an app, and they were sort of getting people to exercise, not people in chronic pain, but people who in general. And if 2 different subgroups, one had messaging coming in saying, who are you doing this for today? As opposed to do your exercise. 2 different messages, right? And as soon as it was tied into the value, there was just that much more compliance. And it was just so perfect. I'm like, yes, that's exactly what we do as coaches, right? We do that deeper dive to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it or who you're doing it for.
Right. I love that.
Just because we touched on apps, are there any apps that you quite love that you might recommend?
I only can think of one, to be honest. Like I said, many of the people I work with, their brains work better on paper. Which is not common in the world these days. But I do have it's called To Do. I think it's Microsoft To Do app.
Okay.
And this is where I put I call it like my brain dump.
Yes.
So it's not my one that's in my face.
Yeah.
I know I'm blurry, but here's my one that's in my face. It's a sticky note on my desk. But it's the one where I don't want to forget the thing, right? So I just dump it there. Yeah. And then I occasionally go look at it and see if there's anything that I have missed or anything like that. So it's just called To Do. It's like check boxes. It's super simple. You can star them. You can star them if you want to, but it's very simple.
So when it comes to chronic pain, one of the really important tools in our toolkit is our own drug cabinet. And so, when you know all about this, you've spoken to it already, dopamine being one of them. And so by you saying, and I love this, there are ways that we can find dopamine throughout our day. I am the gal that will write out a task that I've already done just so that I can check it off because it feels so good.
I love it. You're not the only one.
I'm not the only one. Nope. So, and then that all comes down to awareness too. So if you know that is a hit of dopamine, it's going to feel better. So paying attention to those little details. But, what sort of ways do you help your students to find little hits of dopamine beyond the checkbox? Are there ways that you find work well?
Well, another way that we talk about is like on a calendar, sort of
Mhm.
like crossing off days on a
Mhm.
calendar.
Right.
Because it could be you're looking forward to just the weekend, or if you're looking forward to a vacation, or someone's coming to visit, or something exciting. So you can sort of, there's a couple things I love about that. One is that you helps you see the passing of time.
Right.
But it's the crossing off,
Yeah.
and the checklists for sure. Little things like just even saying to someone that you're going to do the thing.
Yeah.
Not quite as effective as the writing. I don't think. I'm not totally sure on the research, but like
Right.
saying to someone, and
Yeah.
then will you check in with me? That's
Yes.
another good thing for your
Yes.
listeners too, is like just saying to a friend or a family member, I'm going to X or whatever the thing is, and then say, will you text me later and see if I did it? Right?
Beautiful.
Like
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
strategy to try.
Yeah.
If you're not gonna, if you can't get yourself to write it down yourself, like ask
Yeah.
for some help. Ask
Yeah.
for some help. So the biggies, I mean, I also talk to students, you mentioned students, about
Mhm.
how video game designers know this about dopamine and brains. A
Uh-huh.
lot of my students, not all, but a lot of my students play video games, and maybe adults too, actually, now that I think
Yes.
about it.
Yes, I'm sure.
But they know this about brains, right?
Yeah.
Like you want to level up.
Yes.
I don't know, probably some other technical term.
Yeah.
And then you think you can do it. Your brain,
Yeah.
like it's achievable.
Yeah.
And then usually on the screen,
Yeah.
or like some sort of celebration or some sort of
Yes.
music or something,
Oh,
so we're not alone in trying to seek out some of this dopamine. But yeah, the biggies are like sort of making goals known, or write them down, or the
yeah.
calendar we talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
Um, just tricking your brain a little bit.
Absolutely. And if I can add that chronic pain piece, if you are about to set off on a task and you are looking for that dopamine hit, little things like starting it off with those positive words as opposed to the, I can't do this, this pain's gonna be,
Yeah, great point.
just again, tapping into our own drug cabinet by creating safe spaces with words, with the environment you're in. If you think you want,
Mhm.
dreading doing something, go outside and do it if you can. I mean, if it's cleaning the bathroom,
Yeah.
obviously you can't do that. Or put on some
Yeah.
music that you really
For
enjoy to help
sure.
give you that dopamine hit as well.
Moving your body just even
Mhm.
a little bit is
Yeah.
huge if they can.
And I'm
Um,
just wanting to acknowledge too, before I forget, that I do acknowledge for our chronic pain community that it's different getting things done in the sense that they have to worry more about managing a flare up. So there is a thing called pacing, which for some that can be a bit of a not so nice word, but really all it means is it's being strategic, just like you would for taking
yeah.
baby steps in your tasks. You also
Mhm.
take baby steps in the amount of work that you're doing, working only to a point before pain kicks in,
Yeah.
because that way, long term, you'll be able to do more as opposed to working through the pain.
Right.
That's not a very good reward system, right?
Right.
Is there anything else that maybe we didn't touch on that you really wanted to bring forward today?
I would say, I mean, the only thing I can think of is just try something,
Mhm.
right? Like that's what I say to anybody that I talk to about this thing is, again, it's little by little,
Yeah.
but it doesn't hurt to try something, right? So like some sort of strategy, I people will tell me like I buy all these planners or calendars and I try to use them.
Yeah.
Fine, but then I don't use them.
Yeah.
Fine, that's okay. But
Yeah.
it might get you to the point where you find the one that you do like.
For sure.
So just try something, right? Like just 4 minutes could
Yeah.
be trying something, or even a strategy like writing down your goal. Just today,
Yeah.
I'm going to write down my goal today, or this week, or this month, or actually by the time I'm 50, I want to
Mhm.
whatever. So I guess that's something, the self-compassion piece, right? Like
Yeah.
no shame,
Yeah.
and start now.
Mhm.
Try something.
Carrie,
Yes.
how can our listeners get a hold of you if they are interested in learning more?
Well, I have a website, Dina.
Okay, good.
They can find me. It's just my name. So it's www.carriebonnet, CarrieBonnet.com. I do have a free resource for adults that is carriebonnet.com/adult,
Oh.
which is just a little blueprint, probably some of the things that we've talked about today, but like a blueprint for how to approach executive function in your life, which will put you on my email list, which I send out weekly emails with tips and strategies and resources, and products and things. So I would love to hear from any listeners. We could also just chat to see if coaching is a good fit, but I also have lots of free resources as well.
Amazing. Well, for our listeners as well, please know that we've created a space exclusively for those who live with chronic pain, where we deal with a lot of this stuff, all the stuff that's in our podcasts, we do address inside the Academy, and bit by bit, we move those large boulders that are really integral in your recovery. So, but again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your time. And thank you for my dopamine hit for today.
You're welcome. I know that was so fun. Thanks for inviting me, Dina. I really enjoyed it.